The air inside the ruined starship was thick with smoke. Sparks rained down from broken consoles, and the stench of burning metal filled the cabin. Captain Adil Rahman pressed his back against the cold steel wall, gripping his plasma rifle tightly. His breathing was heavy, his heartbeat hammering like a war drum inside his chest. This was not how the mission was supposed to go. Just an hour ago, he and his team had infiltrated the Xilari dreadnought Voidfang, a massive warship hovering in orbit above a captured human colony. The plan was simple: sabotage the ship's core and escape before the alien fleet realized what had happened. But something had gone horribly wrong. The Xilari were waiting for them. "Adil, do you copy?" His earpiece crackled with static before a weak voice came through. It was Sergeant Malik. They knew we were coming." "I know," Adil whispered, pressing a hand to his side where his armor was scorched from a near-miss plasma shot. "How many made it out?" Silence. A deep pit formed in Adil's stomach. He had seen the ambush unfold, his team getting cut down one by one. The Xilari were ruthless, their insectoid warriors moving with terrifying speed and precision. They didn't fight like mindless beasts. They fought with strategy, with tactics, with a hunger that sent chills down his spine. "We're not getting out of this, are we?" Malik's voice was weak, full of pain. Adil shut his eyes. He wanted to say something, anything, to comfort his last surviving teammate, but there was no lie big enough to hide the truth. Before he could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. The Xilari were coming. Adil gritted his teeth, raised his weapon, and prepared to fight. But then, the ship shook violently, and the floor beneath him gave way. Darkness. Adil's body ached as he slowly regained consciousness. His wrists were bound in some kind of energy restraints, glowing blue cuffs that tingled against his skin. He tried to move, but his muscles felt weak. His head was pounding. Then he realized he was no longer on the dreadnought. Cold, dim lighting flickered above him. He was inside a massive chamber, the walls made of some sort of black chitinous material. Strange symbols pulsed faintly, giving off an eerie glow. Adil had never seen anything like it. And then he heard them. A low chittering sound filled the air. Dozens of Xilari stood in the shadows, their red, multifaceted eyes glowing in the dim light. Their exoskeletons gleamed like polished obsidian, their sharp, clawed hands twitching as if eager to strike. These were not mindless drones. These were the elite, the Queen's personal guard. The realization sent ice down Adil's spine. He was in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. A deep, guttural voice echoed from the far end of the chamber. "Human." Adil turned his head and felt his breath catch in his throat. Atop a towering black throne sat the most terrifying creature he had ever seen. The Xilari Queen. Her body was sleek and armored, her form both regal and predatory. She was taller than any of her warriors, her 4 glowing eyes studying him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Her mandibles twitched, and when she spoke, her voice was almost smooth. "You are different." Adil swallowed hard. He had heard stories of the Xilari Queen, Valzira, a merciless ruler, a being of unmatched intelligence and power. No human had ever faced her and lived. "You fight well," she continued, tilting her head slightly. "Your people are weak, yet you survive. Why?" Adil forced himself to meet her gaze. "Because we refuse to die." A low, rumbling sound came from the Queen. Was she laughing? "I admire that." She slowly rose from her throne and stepped forward, the chamber trembling slightly with each movement. "You were captured alive for a reason, human. I do not waste time with the weak." Adil clenched his fists. "So, what now? You torture me, use me as some experiment." The Queen's mandibles twitched again. "No." She leaned closer, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "I offer you a deal." Adil felt his stomach tighten. A deal. This was not what he expected. You see, Captain Rahman. She said his name slowly, as if testing how it felt on her tongue. My empire is not as unified as your people believe. There are those who seek to overthrow me, to tear down what I have built. She took another step forward, and Adil realized something unsettling. Her expression was not just one of power, but of calculation. She was studying him, measuring him, deciding whether he was worth whatever she was about to propose. I need strength, a warrior at my side, she continued. A partner. Adil's blood ran cold. Partner. He narrowed his eyes. You mean a servant? The queen's mandibles curled into what almost resembled a smirk. No, human. I mean my mate. Silence. Adil couldn't believe what he had just heard. His mind raced to make sense of it, but no explanation seemed logical. This had to be some kind of trick. Why? He finally forced out. Why me? Valzira's gaze bore into him. Because you are not like the others. You do not cower. You do not beg. You fight. She tilted her head slightly. And if I am to keep my throne, I need a warrior who understands battle the way you do. Adil's jaw tightened. And what do I get out of this deal? The queen raised a clawed hand. Your freedom. That word hung in the air. Freedom. He could walk away. No more war. No more bloodshed. He could leave this nightmare behind. But at what cost? Adil looked around the chamber, at the countless Xilari warriors watching him like hungry beasts. He could see the unspoken challenge in their eyes. If he refused, he was dead. His mind screamed at him to say no, to resist, to fight. But another part of him, the part that had survived battle after battle, whispered something else. Play the game. Find a way to win. Adil took a slow breath and met the queen's glowing eyes. I'll think about it. A deep, rumbling sound filled the chamber. Amusement. Valzira leaned even closer, her mandibles just inches from his face. Good, she whispered, because you do not have much time. Adil didn't blink. He had survived countless battles, faced death 1,000 times. But as he stood before the Xilari queen, he realized something terrifying. For the first time in his life, he was truly afraid. Adil sat in the dimly lit chamber, his wrists still bound by the glowing energy restraints. His body ached from the battle, but his mind was working fast. The Xilari queen's words echoed in his head. I need a warrior at my side, a partner, my mate. Even now, he could hardly believe it. He had expected torture, interrogation, or even execution. But this was something far worse. He had faced death before. He had stood on battlefields where the ground was soaked in blood. He had watched friends die in his arms, but never in his life had he imagined this, being chosen as the mate of the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. Adil exhaled slowly. He had to think carefully. This wasn't just about him. Humanity was still at war with the Xilari. If he refused the queen's offer, he would be executed. If he accepted, he could gain valuable intelligence, maybe even find a way to escape. Play the game. Find a way to win. That was the only option. The doors of the chamber hissed open. A group of Xilari warriors entered, their black exoskeletons gleaming under the dim lights. Their red, multifaceted eyes stared at Adil with a mix of curiosity and disgust. A taller one stepped forward, his armor adorned with jagged silver markings. He was different from the others. Higher rank, maybe. He let out a clicking sound before speaking. You are summoned. Adil's restraints deactivated with a low hum. He rubbed his wrists, trying to shake off the numbness. He could still feel their eyes on him, watching, waiting for him to resist. But he didn't. Not yet. The guards flanked him as they marched through the massive corridors of the Xilari palace. The walls were covered in organic, kitten-like structures, pulsing with a faint blue glow. It felt less like a palace, and more like the inside of some giant living creature. At last, they arrived at a towering set of doors. They slid open, revealing a grand chamber. At the center of it all stood Queen Valzyra. She was just as imposing as before, taller than any human, her sleek black exoskeleton giving her a regal yet deadly appearance. Her 4 glowing eyes studied him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. She gestured toward a raised platform in the center of the chamber. "Come forward, Captain Raman." Adil hesitated for only a moment before stepping onto the platform. Valzyra's mandibles twitched slightly, an amused expression crossing her alien face. "Good. You are learning." Adil kept his face neutral. "Let's just get to the point." The queen let out a low, rumbling sound, something between a purr and a growl. "Very well." She raised a clawed hand, and the walls of the chamber flickered to life. Suddenly, holographic images surrounded them. Battlefields, burning human colonies, wrecked ships drifting in the void. Scenes of destruction, all caused by the HFY Empire. Adil clenched his fists. "Is this supposed to impress me?" Valzyra tilted her head. "No, it is meant to remind you of reality." She took a slow step forward, her claws clicking against the floor. "Your people are losing. You know this." Adil said nothing. She continued, circling him like a predator. "But what if there was another way? What if this war could end without further bloodshed?" Adil narrowed his eyes. "You expect me to believe that?" The queen stopped in front of him. "I expect you to listen." She raised her hand again, and the images changed. This time, they showed HFY ships fighting. Other HFY ships. Civil war. Rebellion. Adil frowned. He had assumed the HFY Empire was united. But this was different. "My enemies seek to overthrow me," Valzyra said, her voice calm but filled with something deeper. Anger. "They are fanatics who wish to conquer and enslave, to wipe out all who oppose them." Her glowing eyes locked onto Adil. "If they win, humanity will not be spared." Adil folded his arms. "And what do you want from me?" Valzyra's mandibles twitched in amusement. "I told you. I need a warrior. A mate. Someone strong enough to stand beside me." Adil let out a humorless chuckle. "You expect me to just accept this, to stand by your side like some kind of trophy?" The queen's expression darkened. "You misunderstand. This is no mere gesture." She turned to the side and motioned toward one of the guards. The warrior stepped forward, carrying a long, jagged blade. He held it out, and Valzyra took it. The moment she did, the guards began to back away. Adil tensed. Then she turned to him. "Strength is everything in my empire," she said. "If you wish to stand by my side, you must prove yourself." Adil's eyes flicked to the blade in her hand. "You want me to fight?" She smiled. "A sharp, dangerous thing. I want you to survive." A door at the far end of the chamber opened. A deep, guttural roar filled the air. Adil turned his head and felt his breath catch in his throat. A monstrous HFY warrior stepped forward. It was different from the others, larger, more heavily armored. Its claws were longer, its mandibles dripping with some kind of venom. It was a brute, a killing machine. Valzyra tossed the blade to Adil. "Kill him." Adil barely caught the weapon in time before the creature lunged. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a clawed hand that slammed into the ground where he had just been standing. The impact sent cracks splintering across the floor. Adil had fought HFY before. He knew how fast they were, how strong. This one was bigger than any he had ever faced, and it was coming straight for him. He ducked under another swipe and slashed out with the blade. The weapon cut deep into the creature's arm, but it barely reacted. Instead, it grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Adil gasped for air, his vision blurring. He swung the blade wildly, slicing into the creature's arm. It roared in pain and released him. He hit the ground hard, coughing as he scrambled to his feet. The brute charged again. This time, Adil didn't run. He dodged to the side at the last second and drove the blade deep into the creature's side. It howled, stumbling forward. Adil ripped the blade free and spun, slashing across its throat. Black blood sprayed across the chamber. The brute staggered, then collapsed. Silence. Then slow applause. Adil turned to see Valzura watching him with approval. Impressive. Adil wiped the sweat from his brow. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stay still, to remain strong. The queen stepped closer. You are exactly what I need. Adil's heart pounded. He had just proven himself, but at what cost? Valzura leaned in, her voice a whisper. You will learn, Captain Rahman, she said. You are already playing my game. And with those words, Adil realized something chilling. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was being pulled deeper into the queen's web. And there might be no way out. Adil stood in the middle of the blood-soaked chamber, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. The axillary brute lay motionless at his feet, black ichor pooling around its massive body. His hands were still clenched around the jagged blade, his muscles burning from the fight. The silence that followed was worse than the battle itself. The queen's red eyes gleamed with satisfaction. You did well, she said, her voice smooth, almost pleased. Adil gritted his teeth. His heart was still racing, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had survived, but he knew this was only the beginning. Valzura stepped closer, her towering form casting a long shadow over him. Tell me, Captain Rahman, she murmured, do you finally understand your place in my empire? Adil met her gaze. I understand one thing, he said coldly. You enjoy playing games. The queen let out a low, clicking sound, her version of a laugh. You call it a game, she mused. I call it survival. She turned away, motioning for her guards to remove the brute's lifeless body. The axillary warriors obeyed immediately, dragging the corpse out of the chamber without a word. Adil's mind raced. This wasn't just about proving his strength. The queen was testing him, seeing how far she could push him before he broke. He couldn't afford to break. Valzura turned back to him. Come, she commanded. We have much to discuss. Adil hesitated for only a moment before following. The queen led him through the vast corridors of her palace. Strange, organic-looking walls pulsed with an eerie glow, as if the structure itself were alive. The air was thick with a strange scent, something between metal and earth. Adil had never seen anything like it. They finally arrived at an open balcony, overlooking a massive axillary city. Adil's breath caught in his throat. The city stretched as far as the eye could see, a sprawling network of towering structures, glowing pathways, and massive starships floating in the sky like silent sentinels. Thousands, no, millions, of Xilari moved below, their movements precise, disciplined. It was an empire built on power. Valzura stood beside him, her gaze sweeping over the city. Magnificent, is it not? Adil remained silent. He couldn't deny its scale, its strength, but all he saw was the enemy. Valzura continued, I built this empire with my own hands. I crushed those who stood in my way. I united the axillary under one rule. She turned to him. And now, I am offering you something no human has ever been given. Adil folded his arms. And what's that? She stepped closer. A place at my side. Power. Influence. Survival. Adil exhaled sharply. And in return, her mandibles twitched in amusement. Loyalty. Adil narrowed his eyes. This was it. The moment where he had to decide his next move. If he refused, she would kill him. That much was clear. If he accepted, Adil's mind raced. If he played along, he could learn more about her, gain her trust, find a weakness, maybe even find a way to escape or sabotage her rule from within. It was a dangerous game. But then again, he had never been afraid of danger. Adil let out a slow breath and met her gaze. I'll listen. Valzura smiled. Good. Hours later, Adil found himself in a grand chamber, seated at a long curved table. Several high-ranking Silari warlords stood around it, their sharp chitinous armor gleaming under the dim lights. They eyed him with open hostility. One of them, a hulking warrior with jagged scars running across his exoskeleton, hissed in disgust. "You insult us by bringing a human here," he growled. Adil said nothing. He had expected this. Valzura merely tilted her head. "You doubt my decision, General Korak." The warlord's mandibles twitched. "This creature is an enemy. You should have killed him." Valzura's eyes darkened. "He killed one of our strongest in single combat. Would you have preferred I let him kill you instead?" Korak stiffened, his claws tightening into fists. The queen leaned forward. "A warrior who survives against all odds is a warrior worth keeping," she said, her voice sharp. "Perhaps you would like to test that theory yourself." Korak hesitated. Adil saw it. The slight shift in his stance, the way his mandibles twitched. The warlord was strong, but he wasn't stupid. After a long moment, he stepped back. "I will obey." Valzura turned to Adil, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You see, Captain, strength commands respect in my empire." Adil forced a neutral expression, but inside, his mind was working fast. The queen had just defended him, not because she cared about him, but because she was playing her own game. And if he was going to survive, he had to play it too. Later that night, Adil sat in his private quarters. It was nothing like a prison cell. The room was large, filled with alien architecture that pulsed with faint energy. The walls seemed to shift, as if responding to his presence. A large window overlooked the Xilari city, its strange beauty stretching endlessly into the horizon. He sat on the edge of the strange, metallic bed, staring at his reflection in the glass. He looked exhausted, a soldier, a survivor, a prisoner in a gilded cage. A soft clicking sound made him turn. Valzura stood in the doorway, her red eyes glowing in the dim light. Adil tensed. No guards this time. She stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind her. "I do not need them." He exhaled slowly. "Why are you here?" The queen studied him for a long moment. "You intrigue me, human." Adil let out a dry chuckle. "I bet I do." She took another step closer. "Most of your kind would have broken by now. But you," her voice lowered, "you still resist." Adil met her gaze. "I don't trust you." Valzura smirked. "Good. Trust is earned." Silence stretched between them. Finally, she spoke again. "You have a choice, Captain Rahman." Adil frowned. "What choice?" She stepped even closer, her towering form just inches away. "You can resist until you are broken," she said softly, "or you can rise beside me and change the fate of your people." Adil stared at her, his mind racing. She wasn't lying. If he sided with her, he would gain power, influence, maybe even the ability to protect humanity in ways he never imagined. But at what cost? His soul, his honor. He clenched his fists. He had to choose carefully, because once he stepped into the queen's game, there would be no turning back. Adil stood at the heart of the Silari War Council, his mind sharp, his body tense. Around him, the towering insectoid warriors chittered in their strange language, their mandibles clicking as they argued. Their glowing eyes flicked toward him every few moments, filled with suspicion and barely contained rage. He knew what they thought of him, a human among their kind, a weak creature who had no place in their empire. And yet, Valzura had placed him here. The queen sat on her throne, her crimson eyes locked onto the holographic war map in front of them. The Xilari fleet was preparing for an invasion, a full-scale attack on Earth. The sight of it made Adil's stomach twist, but he kept his expression neutral. He needed to be patient. He needed to wait for the right moment. "General Korak." Valzura's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Report." The scared warlord, the one who had despised Adil from the beginning, stepped forward. His massive body was covered in dark battle armor, his claws twitching in irritation. "Our fleet is nearly ready, my queen," he growled. "We will crush the humans before they can mount any real resistance." Adil clenched his fists under the table. Earth wouldn't stand a chance. Humanity had fought back before, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. The auxiliary ships were larger, faster, more powerful. A full invasion would mean extinction. He had to do something. Valzera turned her gaze to Adil. "And what do you think, Captain Rahman?" The room fell silent. Every auxiliary in the chamber turned to him, their glowing eyes narrowed. Adil didn't hesitate. He had spent enough time among them to know how they thought. "If we attack head-on, humans will fight to the last man," he said, his voice calm. "They may be weaker than you, but they are stubborn. Corner them, and they will become dangerous." Karuk scoffed. "They are insects compared to us. You overestimate your kind." Adil smirked. "Then why haven't you won already?" Karuk's mandibles flared in anger. A few warriors hissed in agreement, but Valzera raised a hand, silencing them. "Go on," she said. Adil pointed at the war map. "If you want to win without losing countless soldiers, you need to strike differently. Target leadership, cut off command, break their hope before they can organize." Valzera tilted her head, considering his words. Karuk bared his fangs. "You expect us to trust a human strategy." Adil met his gaze without fear. "I expect you to use every advantage you have." Valzera leaned forward. "You suggest infiltration." Adil hesitated. This was the moment. He could plant the idea, guide the invasion into a trap. "Yes," he said, "but we need precision, not brute force." The queen tapped her clawed fingers on the table. "I will think on this." The meeting was over. The warriors left, but Adil lingered. Valzera studied him. "You are clever." "I'm a survivor," Adil replied. She smiled. "I expect great things from you." He nodded, then turned and walked away. He had bought some time, but time was running out. That night, Adil stood by the massive window of his quarters, looking down at the auxiliary city. He had to act. Now. The door opened behind him. He turned, his heart pounding, then relaxed slightly. It was Nyla. The auxiliary scientist had been his only true ally here. Unlike the others, she didn't look at him with hatred. She had studied humans for years, fascinated by them. "We don't have much time," she whispered. Adil nodded. "Tell me." She stepped closer, her insectoid eyes sharp with urgency. "The fleet leaves in 2 days." 2 days. Adil exhaled slowly. "I need access to the main comm system," he said. "I have to warn Earth." Nyla hesitated. "If they catch you." "They won't," Adil said firmly. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I will help you." Adil felt a flicker of hope, but hope wasn't enough. He needed a plan. The next night, Adil moved through the halls of the auxiliary fortress, his pulse steady. Nyla had done her part. The security system had a small window of vulnerability, just enough for him to slip through. The communications chamber was ahead. 2 guards stood outside. Adil had no choice. He moved fast, striking before they could react. The first went down with a sharp blow to the throat. The second lunged at him, but Adil twisted, using the alien's momentum against him. The guard hit the ground hard, and Adil finished him with a brutal strike. He didn't waste time. Inside, the console flickered to life. He typed fast, bypassing auxiliary encryption. His training had prepared him for this. He sent the warning message to Earth, his fingers moving rapidly over the controls. Then, the alarm blared. His heart pounded. They had found him. He turned just as the doors burst open. Karuk stood there, his eyes burning with rage. Traitor. Adil barely had time to react before the warlord lunged at him. The impact sent him crashing into the console. Sparks flew as the system overloaded. Adil gritted his teeth, twisting away from Karak's claws. He had to escape. The next thing he knew, he was on his knees. Blood dripped from his face. His arms were bound in energy restraints. Valzera stood before him, her red eyes burning with something unreadable. Karak smirked from behind her. "I warned you, my queen. The human is weak." Adil met her gaze without flinching. "I had no choice," he said. Valzera tilted her head. "No choice." Adil exhaled. "I couldn't let my people die." Silence. Then, the queen laughed. A cold, sharp sound. "I should kill you," she said. Adil didn't move. "Then do it." More silence. Then, Valzera did something that shocked everyone. She turned to Karak. "And what should be done with a warrior who fights for what he believes in?" she asked. Karak hesitated. Valzera smiled. "I will not kill you, Captain Rahman," she said. "Not yet." She stepped closer. "You are valuable. You have proven that." Her eyes gleamed. "But make no mistake. This is your last chance." Adil clenched his jaw. He was still alive. But at what cost? The war was coming. And now he was in the middle of it. Would he fight from within? Or was it already too late? Adil sat in the cold, dark cell, his hands still bound in the energy restraints. His body ached from the beating he had received after Karak caught him. His lip was split, and his ribs felt bruised. But the pain didn't matter. What mattered was the fact that his message had been sent. Earth knew about the invasion. But would they have time to prepare? Adil exhaled, leaning his head back against the metal wall. He could hear the low hum of the Siluri ship's engines around him. He wasn't sure how much time had passed since his capture. Hours, maybe days. Then, the door slid open. Valzera stepped inside. She moved with the same cold grace she always had, her crimson eyes watching him closely. But this time, there was something different in her expression, something unreadable. She stood in front of him, her long claws tapping against her armored thigh. "I should have you executed," she said. Adil looked up at her, his face calm. "Then do it." She tilted her head, so eager to die. "No," he admitted, "but if that's my fate, I won't beg." Valzera studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she sighed. "You are not like the others," she murmured. Adil frowned. "What does that mean?" She crouched in front of him, her gaze sharp. "You are human. Weak, fragile, insignificant compared to my kind. And yet, you fight. Even knowing you would be caught, you still betrayed me." Adil stayed silent. "I should hate you for it," she continued. "And yet, I don't." Her words sent a chill down his spine. What was she planning? "I gave you my trust," she said. "I gave you a place by my side. And you still chose them." Adil took a deep breath. "They're my people. You knew that." Valzera's mandibles twitched slightly, a sign of frustration. "Yes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she stood. "I could still use you, Adil Rahman," she said, her voice softer than before. "You are valuable to me." He tensed. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I do not wish to kill you," she replied. "But if you wish to live, you must make a choice." Adil narrowed his eyes. "What choice?" She leaned closer, her red eyes glowing. "Swear loyalty to me, to the Siluri Empire, and you will not only live, you will rule at my side." His blood ran cold. "I am offering you something no human has ever had," she continued. "Power, protection, a place among the strongest beings in the galaxy." Adil clenched his fists. "And what about Earth?" She sighed. "The invasion will happen, whether you are with us or not." Adil's heart pounded. If he accepted, he might survive, but at the cost of betraying his people completely. If he refused, he would be executed. Either way, Earth was still in danger. He had to think. Fast. The next morning, Valzura's war council gathered once more. Adil stood beside her, his hands now free, but his mind still trapped in conflict. He had made a decision, a dangerous one. Karuk sneered at him from across the table. The human should not be here. Valzura lifted a hand. Silence. She turned to Adil. Tell me, Captain Raman, do you stand with us? Adil took a slow breath. Then he stepped forward. I will fight, he said. A ripple of shock went through the council. Karuk slammed a fist on the table. You trust him? Valzura smiled. I do. Adil kept his expression neutral. He had just placed himself in the most dangerous position possible. He had chosen to stay. But he wasn't staying to help them. He was staying to destroy them from within. Days passed. The invasion fleet was nearly ready. Adil played his part carefully. He trained with the auxiliary warriors, studied their tactics, learned everything he could. He acted loyal. But behind the scenes, he was planning something far more dangerous. Nyla was the only one who knew the truth. One night, she found him in the war room, staring at the holographic map of Earth. You're still fighting for them, she whispered. Adil glanced at her. I never stopped. She hesitated. If they find out. They won't, he said firmly. Not until it's too late. She sighed. What are you planning? Adil pointed at the war map. I know the auxiliaries' greatest weakness now, he said. Their technology is superior, but they rely too much on centralized command. If we can cripple their leadership, the invasion falls apart. Nyla finished. He nodded. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only chance Earth had. The day of the invasion arrived. Adil stood on the bridge of the auxiliary flagship, surrounded by towering alien warriors. The fleet was in position. Earth's defenses were already scrambling. It was now or never. Valzura stepped beside him. It is time, she said. Adil took a deep breath. Then he acted. With a swift motion, he activated the emergency override on the control panel. The ship's alarms blared. What are you doing? Karuk roared. Adil didn't answer. He reached for Valzura's wrist, grabbing the control key from her armor. Guards rushed toward him. But Nyla was already moving. She had planted sabotage devices throughout the ship, and now they activated all at once. Explosions rocked the command deck. Adil spun, driving his fist into a guard's throat before grabbing a plasma rifle. The battle had begun. Smoke filled the air. Adil fought his way through the chaos, Nyla at his side. The auxiliary were powerful, but they had never expected betrayal from within. Valzura, wounded but still standing, watched Adil with a strange expression. You, she whispered. Adil aimed his rifle at her. It's over. She laughed, even as blood dripped from her lips. You are a true warrior, Adil Rahman, she murmured. Then, to his shock, she reached for her own console and pressed a command. The auxiliary fleet, every ship still in orbit, shuddered. Self-destruct. Valzura had chosen death over defeat. Adil's eyes widened. No. The flagship trembled violently. He grabbed Nyla's arm. We have to go. The escape pods were their only chance. As the flames rose behind them, Adil dived into the pod, slamming the release switch. The last thing he saw before the doors sealed shut was Valzura, standing tall, her red eyes still locked onto him. And then, fire consumed the ship. The pod shot away, speeding toward Earth. Adil watched as the auxiliary fleet, once the greatest threat to humanity, erupted into a cascade of explosions. The war was over. But at what cost? As he landed on Earth, soldiers surrounded the pod. Adil stepped out, breathing in the familiar air of his home. A general approached him, his eyes filled with disbelief. You did it, he whispered. Adil exhaled. Yeah. But as he looked up at the burning sky, He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Because he knew the truth. The HFY weren't the only threat in the universe. And one day, something worse would come. And when it did, humanity would be ready. Adil Rahman stood on the scorched earth, his body aching from the battle. The war with the HFY was over, but his mind was far from at peace. The remains of the alien fleet still burned in the upper atmosphere, a testament to the brutal struggle that had just ended. The HFY, once thought to be unstoppable, had been defeated, but at what cost? The wind carried the scent of ash and burnt metal. Soldiers surrounded him, their weapons lowered but their eyes filled with curiosity and suspicion. Adil had been a prisoner, then a warrior, and now, what was he? A traitor, a hero. The general who had greeted him earlier stepped forward again. His name was General Mitchell, a hardened veteran with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You really pulled it off," the general said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You took down their entire command structure." Adil nodded, exhaustion settling into his bones. It was the only way. Mitchell studied him. "You knew the risks. You knew you might not make it back." Adil exhaled. "I had to try." The general gave him a long look before nodding. "Come with me. We need to debrief, and the world needs to know what happened." The aftermath. Hours later, Adil sat in a secure bunker beneath Earth's military headquarters. He had given his full report. How he had gained Valzura's trust. How he had sabotaged the HFY fleet from within, and how their self-destruction had sealed humanity's victory. The room was filled with top officials, all listening carefully. Some looked impressed, others skeptical. "You're saying the HFY are completely wiped out?" one of them asked. Adil shook his head. "Not entirely. Their main fleet is gone. Their leadership is dead. But there may still be survivors." "Do you think they'll come back?" another official questioned. Adil hesitated. "Not immediately. But the HFY were an empire. Empires don't vanish overnight. Someone out there might want revenge." A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, General Mitchell spoke. "And what about Valzura? You were close to her." Adil's jaw tightened. He had seen her die, standing on the burning flagship as it collapsed in flames. But her words still echoed in his mind. "You are a true warrior, Adil Rahman." He pushed the thought away. "She's gone," he said firmly. "She made her choice." The officials nodded, satisfied with his answer. But deep down, Adil wasn't sure if she was truly dead. A world changed forever. After the meeting, Adil stepped outside. The sky was a dull gray, the aftereffects of the battle still lingering. Cities had been damaged, but humanity had survived. Nyla stood nearby, watching the horizon. "You did it," she said quietly. Adil joined her. "We did it." She gave him a small smile. "So what happens now?" That was the question, wasn't it? The HFY were gone, but the universe was vast, and war had a way of attracting new enemies. "We prepare," Adil said, "because this isn't over." Nyla nodded, understanding the weight of his words. And as they stood there, watching the dawn of a new future, Adil knew that humanity's fight was far from finished. The war with the HFY had ended, but the next battle was just beginning.